Welcome back, my friends. If this is your first time here, I'm glad you found us. This channel is where I share stories that dig deep into the heart of family sacrifice and the quiet heartbreaks that many of us carry but rarely speak aloud. If you believe in the power of love, forgiveness, and lessons learned the hard way, I invite you to subscribe. You'll find a home here among stories that might feel closer to your own life than you'd expect. Today's story is titled At the House I Built with My Own Hands. My son told me, "Dad, this isn't your house anymore." I never thought I'd hear words like that from my own boy. "Dad, this isn't your house anymore." He said it flatly without hesitation, the way a man might dismiss an old shirt he had outgrown. I stood there on the porch, the wood groaning faintly beneath my boots, the same porch I had nailed plank by plank 3 decades ago. I remember that summer like it was yesterday. The heat of July sweat rolling down my back, the sound of hammers echoing into the evening sky. I worked double shifts at the shop back then, but every spare hour I had I poured into this place. These hands, scarred and rough, laid the bricks, raised the beams, painted the walls. That house wasn't just wood and nails. It was my promise. My promise to my wife before she passed. My promise to give my children a home where they'd feel safe, where birthdays were celebrated, and where the smell of Thanksgiving turkey would drift out the kitchen window and into the street. And for years, it was exactly that. A sanctuary. A place where my little boy Ethan learned to ride his first bike in the driveway. Where my daughter Emily pressed her tiny handprints into the wet cement just outside the back door. Where laughter once echoed against the living room walls until late at night. Now, decades later, I was standing outside that very house staring at the same window frames I had sanded smooth, the same door I had hung, only to realize I was no longer welcome. My son's voice still rang in my ears. Cold. Final. "Dad, this isn't your house anymore." It hit me harder than any blow I'd ever taken in my life. Not because of the words themselves, but because of who spoke them. Ethan, the boy who once clung to my shoulders, who once believed his father was the strongest man alive, now looked at me as if I were a stranger trespassing on his front lawn. Behind him, I could see the curtains in the living room swaying. Someone was inside his wife, no doubt. I imagined her eyes peeking through, waiting for me to leave, eager to erase me from this place. It wasn't just rejection. It was erasure. I felt the weight of years pressing down on me. My chest tightened, not just from age, but from heartbreak. My hands, the same ones that once swung hammers and carried lumber, trembled at my sides. My tongue felt dry, useless, as if words had abandoned me. I wanted to remind them both, that every corner of this house carried my fingerprints. That the foundation beneath his feet had been dug by my own shovel. That even the trees lining the backyard were planted by me and his mother when life still felt whole. But in that moment, I couldn't say a word. I only stared at the doorframe, the chipped paint, the familiar scent of cedar that clung to the walls, and realized that a lifetime of work could be stripped away in a single sentence. "Dad, this isn't your house anymore." The wind picked up. The porch light flickered, and I felt for the first time like a ghost haunting the very home I had built. I didn't sleep that night. After Ethan closed the door, leaving me alone on the porch, I wandered back to my truck. I sat there in the driver's seat with my hands on the wheel, staring at the old oak tree across the yard. That tree, I planted it the same year Ethan was born. His mother and I wanted a symbol of life, something that would grow as he grew. Now the branches stretched wide, strong and stubborn, while I sat shrinking inside my own silence. I thought back to the day I first bought the lot. It wasn't much back then, just a patch of dirt with weeds taller than my knees. People in town told me I was crazy. "Max," they said, "you don't have the money for that kind of project? You'll kill yourself trying." And maybe I almost did, but I was determined. Every paycheck, every extra hour at the shop I saved. No vacations, no nights out. Every dollar went into that dream, a home for my family. When the bank told me the loan wouldn't cover the whole bill, I didn't quit. I scavenged wood from old barns, bought second-hand nails, even hauled bricks from a demolition site 2 counties over. My neighbors shook their heads, but I kept going. I can still feel the burn in my arms from carrying those bricks, the splinters in my palms from the boards. And when Ethan was just a boy, he'd run around barefoot in the half-finished rooms, pretending the skeleton of the house was a castle. One day, Dad, he said, his eyes sparkling, "This will be the biggest house in the world." I laughed then, but in my heart, I wanted it to be true. Not in size, but in love. I remembered working late one winter night, hammer echoing under the stars. My wife, Anna, came out with a lantern and a thermos of coffee. She pressed it into my hands and whispered, "Max, don't push yourself so hard." I smiled, wiped the sweat from my brow, and told her every nail I drive is for them. For Ethan. For Emily. For us. And I meant it. Every sacrifice, every missed meal, every aching bone was for them. When the house was finally done, I felt like I had carved a piece of my soul into the earth. It wasn't perfect. The paint chipped the roof, leaked after the first storm, but it was ours. Ethan had his own room, Emily painted hers pink, and Anna filled the kitchen with the smell of fresh bread every Sunday. That house saw us through everything. Through Christmas mornings when the kids tore open presents in front of the fireplace. Through teenage years when arguments slammed doors so hard the frames shook. Through the hardest nights when Anna's illness grew worse. And I sat by her bedside listening to her breathe, praying the walls would hold us together just a little longer. She never made it to see Emily graduate. But before she passed, she took my hand and said, "Promise me, Max. Promise me you'll always keep this house for the kids. It's their anchor." And I promised. With tears rolling down my face, I swore that this place would always be theirs. That's why years later, when Ethan and his wife said they were struggling, I didn't hesitate. He'd lost his job. The bills piled up. His wife, Rachel, was expecting their second child. They were drowning. And when he came to me, voice shaking, saying, "Dad, we can't keep up. We're going to lose everything I gave him, the only thing I had left, the house," I transferred the deed into his name. Just like that. No lawyer haggling, no strings attached. I told myself it was the right thing. A father's duty. Better you and your family have security than me grow old with a piece of paper. That's what I told Ethan. But as I sat in my truck that night replaying his words, "Dad, this isn't your house anymore," I wondered if I had given him more than the house. Maybe I had given him permission to forget, to erase me from the very foundation of our lives. The oak trees swayed in the night air. My hands gripped the wheel tighter. For the first time, I felt the weight of my sacrifices pressed down like chains. It didn't happen all at once. No, it was little things at first, almost invisible, like cracks forming under fresh paint. Rachel never came out and said she didn't want me around. But I could feel it in the air the same way you feel a storm before the first drop falls. I remember one Sunday afternoon a few months after I signed the house over. I'd brought over a casserole, the kind Anna used to make layers of potatoes, cream, and cheese baked until the top was golden. I thought the smell might bring back old memories for Ethan, maybe even comfort Rachel a little in her pregnancy. When I walked in, Rachel gave me a polite smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks, Max," she said, taking the dish without looking at me. She set it on the counter, covered it with foil, and slid it into the back of the fridge without another word. During dinner, she never brought it out. Ethan noticed, of course. He glanced at me across the table, but he didn't say anything. He never did not when it came to Rachel. Then there were the toys. I'd bought a wooden rocking horse for their oldest little Caleb. I'd carved it myself, spending weeks in my workshop, sanding the edges smooth, staining the wood a warm honey color. When I gave it to him, Caleb lit up. He rode it up and down the living room, shouting, "Giddy up, Grandpa." My heart nearly burst. But the next time I came over, the horse was gone. I asked about it, and Rachel's answer was quick, almost rehearsed. It didn't really fit with the decor, Max. We donated it. The decor. That word stung, as if love had to match the curtains. And slowly, the invitations to dinner grew fewer, the conversations shorter. When I did come by, Rachel would excuse herself, retreating upstairs with the kids. Ethan and I would sit at the table in awkward silence, sipping coffee that never seemed as warm as it used to. One evening, as I was leaving, I overheard her whisper sharply to Ethan in the hallway, Your father can't just keep showing up whenever he wants. This isn't his place anymore. The words hit me harder than any fist. I wanted to shout to remind her who laid every brick of this house, who carried every beam on his back. But instead, I tightened my coat around me and walked out into the night without a word. The bitterness grew, but so did the distance. Ethan started calling less. When he did, his voice sounded distracted, hurried, as though Rachel was standing just out of frame, monitoring every word. Still, I told myself it was temporary. I convinced myself Rachel was just adjusting, that once the baby came, once the chaos settled, things would change. Fathers lie to themselves sometimes just to keep hope alive. Then came the breaking point. One Saturday, I arrived with a toolbox in hand. The gutters were sagging, and with rain season coming, I thought I'd save Ethan the trouble. I set the ladder against the side of the house and started working. It felt good, almost like old times, hammer in my hand, the house solid beneath my feet. But before I could finish, Rachel stormed out the front door. "What are you doing?" she demanded, crossing her arms. "Fixing the gutter," I said, wiping sweat from my brow. "It won't take long." Her voice rose sharp as broken glass. "You can't just do whatever you want around here. This isn't your house anymore, Max." For a second, I froze. The words echoed the same ones Ethan had spoken that night. "This isn't your house anymore." Ethan came out behind her, eyes darting between us. He looked like a boy again, caught between parents. But this time he chose silence. He didn't defend me. He didn't stop her. He just let the words hang in the air, heavy and cruel. I climbed down the ladder slowly, every step heavier than the last. I packed my tools without saying a word. And as I drove away, I felt the truth settle deep in my bones. I wasn't just being pushed out of the house I built. I was being pushed out of their lives. The next time I stepped into the house, it didn't feel like mine at all. I stood at the threshold, staring at the entryway I had once built with my own hands. The oak floors I had chosen, the staircase I had sanded and stained, it all looked different now. Rachel had redecorated. Family portraits of her parents lined the hallway, not a single photo of me in sight. It was as if I had been erased. Caleb came running, arms open wide. Shouting "Grandpa," he wrapped himself around my leg, and for a moment the world felt right. But Rachel's voice quickly cut through the air. "Caleb, don't bother your grandpa. He's busy." Busy. I wasn't busy. I was desperate for these moments, desperate to cling to what was left. I bent down, scooped Caleb up, and whispered, "You never bother me, buddy. Not ever." He smiled, but Rachel's eyes narrowed, and she turned away, disappearing into the kitchen. I joined Ethan at the table. He was scrolling through his phone, barely lifting his head. "How's work, Dad?" he asked almost mechanically. I wanted to tell him I was slowing down, that the years were catching up with me, that I was lonely. I wanted to remind him of the nights I worked double shifts so he could play baseball the mornings I packed lunches while other dads were still asleep. But his eyes stayed glued to that screen, and I knew he wasn't really listening. So instead, I just said, "Same old, son. Same old." Dinner that night was strained. Rachel cooked, served plates, and spoke mostly to Ethan. Every time I tried to join in, she gave curt answers, her smile polite but cold. I asked about the baby, how she was feeling, if she needed help. She brushed me off with, "We're fine, Max. Don't worry about it." I looked at Ethan, hoping he would bridge the gap. But he just kept eating, staring down at his plate. Later, when dessert came, Rachel set down slices of pie. She gave Ethan the biggest piece, the kids medium slices, and me a sliver so thin it was almost insulting. A part of me wanted to laugh. It seemed so petty, so deliberate, but the laughter stuck in my throat. I realized then that I was no longer seen as family at this table. I was a visitor, a guest, an outsider. After dinner, I helped clear the plates. Old habits. Rachel snatched the dish from my hands. "I've got it," she said sharply. "You don't need to." The message was clear. I didn't belong in her kitchen. Ethan said nothing. He never said anything. When it was time to leave, Caleb clung to my leg again, crying, "Don't go, Grandpa." My heart swelled and shattered all at once. Rachel gently pried him away, whispering, "Let Grandpa rest." She carried him upstairs without looking back. Ethan walked me to the door. I paused. searching his face for something: recognition, gratitude, love. All I got was a tired smile and a quick hug. "Drive safe, Dad," he said. I stood on the porch, the night air cold on my face, watching the door close between us. The same door I had hung years ago, smoothing its hinges until it swung without a squeak. Now it shut with finality, leaving me outside alone. Driving home, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house no longer carried my fingerprints. It had my bricks, my beams, my sweat. But it wasn't mine. Not in their eyes. Not anymore. That night, lying in bed, I replayed Rachel's words, the way she looked at me, the silence Ethan wrapped himself in. And though I tried to convince myself it would get better deep down, I knew I wasn't just being pushed out of the house, I was being pushed out of the family I had built. A few weeks later, Rachel organized a Sunday dinner at the house. She called it a family gathering, but I hadn't been sure if the invitation extended to me. Ethan mentioned it casually over the phone: "Rachel's having people over, you should stop by," as if I were a distant relative, not his father. Still, I went. A part of me hoped that maybe in front of others, Rachel would treat me differently. That maybe surrounded by family, she'd soften. I even stopped by a bakery on the way and bought a pie, cherry Ethan's favorite since he was a boy. When I arrived, the driveway was full of cars. Laughter spilled from the open windows, the kind of warm buzzing sound that used to fill our house when my late wife and I hosted holidays. I walked up the front steps, slowly, pie balanced in my hands, heart pounding with the nervousness of a guest rather than the confidence of a homeowner. Rachel opened the door. Her smile froze when she saw me. "Oh, Max," she said flatly, like my presence was an inconvenience. She didn't reach for the pie, didn't welcome me in. After a long pause, she stepped aside. "Come on, everyone's in the living room." Inside, the house looked different again. Rachel had redecorated: even more new rugs, new curtains, new family photos on the walls. Pictures of Ethan, Rachel, the kids, but none of me. Not one. I stepped into the living room where Rachel's parents sat on the couch, glasses of wine in hand. Her father, Charles, was a tall, silver-haired man with an expensive watch that caught the light as he gestured while speaking. He looked like he belonged here, confident, polished. "Ah, the man of the hour," Charles said, standing to greet me. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "The builder of this fine house. You really did a great job, Max. Shame you don't get to enjoy it anymore." The room chuckled lightly. I forced a smile, but my face burned. Rachel quickly added, "Well, we've made a lot of changes since then. It's more our style now." She laughed, as though brushing away the history of the walls I'd raised with my own hands. Ethan sat at the edge of the couch, silent, eyes fixed on his drink. I kept waiting for him to speak, to stand up, to remind them that I was more than just a man who hammered nails. But he said nothing. I set the pie down on the table, clearing my throat. "I brought dessert. Thought Ethan might like it." "Oh, that's sweet," Rachel said, her tone dripping with condescension. She picked up the pie, carried it to the kitchen, and I didn't see it again for the rest of the night. As dinner started, Rachel placed me at the far end of the table opposite her parents. It was a small thing, but it stung. Years ago, I'd always sat at the head, carving the turkey or passing out plates to the kids. Now I sat at the margins like a distant uncle. The conversation revolved around Charles and his business ventures, Rachel's decorating plans, and Ethan's work. Every time I tried to add a memory or a thought, Rachel cut me off politely. "That's nice, Max." But anyway, finally her mother leaned across the table and said, "Rachel tells us you're still in that little mechanic shop. You must be tired of it by now, aren't you?" I swallowed hard. "It's honest work. Paid for this house after all." The room went quiet for a beat. Then Rachel laughed nervously, changing the subject. Ethan still said nothing. By the end of the night, I sat in silence, my food cold on the plate. Caleb tried to climb into my lap, but Rachel pulled him away gently. "Not now, sweetheart. Grandpa's eating." When dessert was served, it wasn't my pie. They had another one store, bought already cut. My gift was never mentioned. Walking out that night, I realized it wasn't just Rachel pushing me out anymore, it was her whole family. And Ethan was letting it happen. On the drive home, the laughter from that house echoed in my ears, drowning out the sound of my own heartbeat. For the first time, I wondered if I was truly losing my son or if I had already lost him. The next time I came by, I knocked on the front door like a visitor. My knuckles tapped against the wood I had once sanded and stained myself a door that had always swung open to my family without hesitation. Now I waited outside, shifting on the porch like a stranger. Rachel opened it. Her hair was done up neatly apron around her waist. She didn't smile. "Max," she said, "clip what brings you by. I held up a bag of groceries, some fruit, and snacks for the kids. Just thought I'd drop these off, maybe spend a little time with them." Her lips pressed tight, but she let me in. The kids squealed when they saw me rushing into my arms. Caleb hugged my leg and shouted, "Grandpa's here." In that moment, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in weeks. But Rachel's voice sliced through it. "Kid's not too loud. Daddy's resting." The house looked even more unfamiliar this time. New furniture, new art on the walls, the faint smell of fresh paint. My framed family photos, the ones with my late wife holding Ethan as a baby, were gone. In their place, Rachel had hung polished portraits of her family. "Where's the old photos?" I asked gently, trying not to sound accusing. Rachel crossed her arms. "We wanted a fresh start. This is our home now, Max. Our walls should tell our story, not yours." I felt something inside me tighten like a fist around my heart. "Our story," I said. "Rachel, I built this place. Every beam, every nail, I bled for it. It's part of my story, too." She gave a sharp laugh. "Max, don't take this the wrong way, but you don't live here anymore. This isn't about you." The kids looked confused. Caleb tugged at my sleeve. "Grandpa, can you still come play?" Before I could answer, Rachel knelt down, stroking his hair. "Grandpa has his own home, sweetie. This is Mommy and Daddy's house now." Her words hit me harder than a punch. Later, Ethan came downstairs, rubbing his eyes still in his work clothes. He saw me and smiled faintly. "Dad, you're here." Rachel jumped in. "I was just explaining to your father that it's confusing for the kids when he drops by too often. They need stability, Ethan. We all do." I turned to my son. "Is that how you feel?" Ethan's eyes darted between us. He shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, it's complicated. Rachel's just trying to keep things simple." "Simple," my voice cracked. "I gave you this house. I wanted you to have something safe, something permanent. And now I'm being told I don't belong here, that I shouldn't come see my own grandchildren." Rachel's tone turned colder. "Max, you need to understand you signed the house over. It's legally ours now. That means we decide who comes and goes." The room spun around me. Legally ours. She wasn't just pushing me out emotionally, she was staking her claim in black and white. Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder, but it felt weak, half-hearted. "Dad, maybe it's just best if you call before you stop by. That way we can plan." I looked at my son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders through county fairs, the man whose first home was built with my bare hands. And I realized he wasn't going to stand up for me. Not against her. The kids were whispering in the corner, unsure why the room had grown so tense. Caleb looked ready to cry. I knelt down and hugged them both, whispering in their ears, "Grandpa loves you. Always." As I stood, Rachel's eyes were on me, sharp as glass. "Max," she said firmly, "you need to accept it. You don't belong here anymore." I left that day carrying the weight of those words, heavier than any hammer or beam I'd ever lifted in my life. A week later, Ethan called me. His voice was quiet, almost apologetic. "Dad, can you come over tonight? Rachel and we need to talk." Something in his tone told me it wouldn't be good news. Still, I drove over my old pickup, rattling down the familiar road. The headlights swept across the front porch, the very one I had built plank by plank, and I sat there for a long moment before stepping out. Inside, the kids ran to greet me again, their little arms wrapping around my waist. For a few seconds, I felt whole. But then Rachel appeared in the hallway, arms folded, eyes sharp. "Ethan," she called, "let's just say what we came here to say." We all sat in the living room. It didn't look like my living room anymore. New rugs, new curtains, the smell of Rachel's candles replacing the old wood and coffee scent that had once clung to the place. Ethan rubbed his hands together. "Dad, we've been talking. Things have been confusing for the kids. I looked at him steadily. Confusing Rachel jumped in her words, crisp and cutting. Max, every time you come over unannounced, it disrupts the routine. The kids don't know if you're staying, if you're living here, or what. It's not healthy for them. I frowned. I never wanted to confuse them. I just wanted to be part of their lives. Rachel leaned forward, her tone tightening. That's just it. You're part of their lives, but you're not part of this household anymore. And we need boundaries. Ethan nodded slowly, avoiding my eyes. Dad, Rachel thinks it's best if you stop staying over. Maybe just come by when we invite you. That way, it's clear for everyone. I felt my chest tighten like someone was pressing down on me with a heavy weight. Invite me, I repeated. You're telling me I can't even stop by my own house without permission? Rachel's voice was ice. It's our house now, Max. You gave it to us, and it's not fair for us to feel like you're hanging around like you haven't moved on. The words burned. Hanging around. Like I was some old stray dog scratching at the door. The kids, sensing the tension, grew quiet. Little Caleb climbed into my lap, whispering, Grandpa, don't go. His small arms clung to my neck like a lifeline. Rachel's face hardened. Caleb, she said sharply, that's enough. I stroked his hair, swallowing the lump in my throat. I'm not leaving you, I whispered to him. No matter what. Then I looked at Ethan. Son, when I built this house, I didn't just build walls and a roof. I built it for family, for you, for your kids. And now you're telling me I don't belong here, that I need an invitation. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't answer. Rachel stood her hands on her hips. Max, you don't belong here. This is our home now, and you're a guest. If you can't respect that, then maybe you shouldn't come around at all. The silence after that was deafening. Finally, I stood setting Caleb gently on the couch. His eyes brimmed with tears. I kissed the top of his head, then turned to Ethan. If that's how it has to be, then fine. But don't forget, son, every brick in this house carries my sweat. Every nail carries my name. You can erase the pictures, but you can't erase the truth. With that, I walked out. The night air was cold, the stars blurred by the sting in my eyes. For the first time, I realized that I wasn't just losing a house, I was losing my place in the family I had built. The next morning, I didn't go straight home. I couldn't. The silence of my empty apartment felt heavier than ever. So instead, I drove aimlessly, the roads rolling beneath my wheels like some endless escape I never asked for. I ended up in the old neighborhood diner, the one with red vinyl booths that squeaked when you sat down, the smell of bacon grease clinging to the air, and a waitress who called everyone honorable. I slid into a booth by the window, ordered black coffee, and stared at my hands. They were rough-lined with scars, calloused from years of holding hammers and lumber. Hands that had built a house, raised a son, cradled a newborn granddaughter. Hands now trembling as if they no longer had a place to rest. Max, I looked up, startled. Standing there was Tom Hensley, my old neighbor from across the street. He looked grayer than I remembered, but his grin was the same. Well, I'll be damned, he said, sliding into the booth across from me. Haven't seen you in ages. You still in that house you built? I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. No, Tom. Not anymore. Ethan lives there now with his wife. Tom raised his eyebrows. Ah, so you passed it on. Good man. That house was your pride and joy. But you must still visit plenty, right? I hesitated. My chest tightened again. Not exactly. Something in my face must have given me away because Tom leaned forward, his voice lowering. What happened, Max? I stared at the steam curling off my coffee, debating whether to tell him. But the words tumbled out before I could stop them. They don't want me around anymore, Tom. My daughter-in-law says I'm a guest. In my own house. Ethan, he just goes along with it? Last night they told me not to stay over again. To wait for an invitation. Tom's face darkened. That's outrageous. You built that place with your own 2 hands. I remember watching you put up those walls. You didn't just build a house, you built a home for your family. I nodded, my throat tight. and now I don't belong in it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Tom said softly, "You know, Max, sometimes people forget where they came from once they get comfortable. They forget the sacrifices that got them there. But that doesn't erase the truth. And it sure as hell doesn't erase your worth." His words hit me harder than I expected. Worth. It had been a long time since anyone reminded me I still had it. Just then, the bell above the diner door jingled. I glanced up and froze. Rachel was there, my daughter-in-law, holding hands with her sister. They spotted me immediately. Her eyes narrowed. "Max," she said coolly, walking over. "Didn't expect to see you here." I clenched my jaw. "I didn't expect to see you either." Tom stood squaring his shoulders. "Rachel, isn't it? I'm Tom Hensley, Max's old neighbor. I watched him build that house you're living in now. Hell, half the neighborhood helped out when the roof went up." Rachel forced a smile, but her voice dripped with condescension. "Yes. Well, Max has been very generous. But it's our home now, Tom. Times change." Tom's eyes flashed. "Generous? He sacrificed his life to build that place for Ethan. Don't you dare talk about him like he's some tenant overstaying his welcome." Rachel's smile cracked. She muttered something about being late, then stormed out, dragging her sister behind her. The diner grew quiet again, but I could still feel the heat of what had just happened. Tom put a hand on my shoulder. "Don't let her break you, Max. You're more than what they make you feel." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something inside me. Not quite hope, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. I sipped my coffee, staring out the window at the house down the road that was no longer mine. And I promised myself they could shut me out, but they couldn't erase me. 2 days later, Ethan called me. His voice carried a strain that instantly set my nerves on edge. "Dad, can you come over? There's something we need to talk about." I hesitated. A part of me wanted to say no to protect what little dignity I had left. But he was still my son, my boy. And when your child asks you to come even after all the hurt, you show up. That's what fathers do. So I drove back to the house I built, every nail and beam etched into my memory. The porch steps creaked the same way they always had under my boots. But as I pushed open the door, I felt like a stranger walking into someone else's life. Rachel sat at the dining room table, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. Ethan stood beside her, looking pale, anxious. Spread out on the polished oak were several sheets of paper, neatly stacked but heavy with intent. "What's this?" I asked, my voice low. Ethan cleared his throat. "Dad, listen. Rachel and I talked, and it's about the house. Legally, it's still in your name, but we think it would be best if we made things official. Signed it over. That way, there's no confusion, no tension." Rachel leaned forward, her voice sharp. "It's only fair. You've already given it to us in every practical sense. But if it stays in your name, people could get the wrong idea. This house is our home now, Max. You've got your own place." I stared at the papers, my chest tightening. It felt like the walls of the house themselves were pressing in on me. I could almost hear the echoes of Ethan's childhood laughter bouncing off them, the hammer strikes from when I built his room, the sound of Maria, his mother, singing while we painted the walls together. "Dad," Ethan said gently, "it'll just make things simpler. Cleaner." I looked at him, really looked. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. His shoulders were tense, as if he already knew what this would do to me. "Cleaner," I repeated, my voice trembling. "Son, I didn't build this house for clean. I built it for you. I bled for these walls. And now you're telling me to erase myself from them." Rachel let out a soft laugh. Cold, dismissive. "Max, don't make this dramatic. You'll still be family. But ownership, that's a formality. And right now, it's standing in the way of our future." Her words sliced through me. Formality. As if the 20 years I poured into this place were nothing more than a line on a deed. "Dad," Ethan pleaded, "please don't see it like that. You'll always be welcome here." I slammed my palm against the table, the sound startling us all. "Don't lie to me, Ethan. Welcome. Rachel has made it clear I'm not welcome. Not in this house. Not in your life. And now you're asking me to sign away the last piece of myself." I still have Rachel's face hardened. If you really loved your son, you'd do this for him. Stop holding on to the past. The silence that followed was suffocating. My hands shook as I picked up the papers, scanning the words through blurred eyes. Transfer of ownership. Permanent. Irrevocable. My name being erased from the only thing I had left to give. I dropped them back onto the table. No, I said, my voice cracking. I won't do it. Ethan looked torn, his lips parting as if to argue, but he stayed silent. Rachel's eyes burned with quiet fury. I turned and walked out before they could say another word. On the porch, I stopped. My chest rose and fell like I'd just run a marathon. Inside, I could hear muffled voices, Rachel's sharp, Ethan's subdued. But I didn't go back. I couldn't. As I stood there, I realized something. They weren't just taking my house. They were trying to take my very identity. And I could not let them strip that from me without a fight. The days after that confrontation blurred together. I buried myself in long walks through town, the kind where you wander with no destination, just to clear the storm in your head. But every step felt heavier, as if the weight of those unsigned papers still sat in my hands. I tried to tell myself Ethan would come to his senses, that maybe late at night he'd realize how cruel it was to ask his father to give up not just a house, but a legacy. But as the phone stayed silent, a gnawing dread crept in. One evening, while sipping coffee at the diner I used to visit with Maria, an old friend leaned over from the counter. Max, you know Rachel's been asking around about property laws. The spoon slipped from my hand, clattering against the mug. What do you mean? She was talking to Greg. He works at the title office. Asking what could be done if the owner wasn't cooperating. Sounded like she's serious about making sure the house is legally theirs. My stomach dropped. Rachel wasn't just pushing. She was plotting. When I finally worked up the courage to drive back to the house, I noticed a change right away. Rachel was on the porch, phone in hand, her voice hushed but sharp. As soon as she saw me, she hung up, forcing a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Max, she said curtly, Ethan's inside. I walked past her, the air between us colder than the late autumn wind. Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread out again. Only this time there were more of them, pamphlets, printouts, even what looked like an email from a lawyer. What is this? I asked, my throat tight. Ethan rubbed his temples. Dad, Rachel, she's been looking into options. Legal options. If you won't sign, there are other ways. Other ways, my voice echoed off the walls. Are you threatening to take me to court over the house I built with my own hands? Rachel stepped forward, arms folded. No one wants a fight, Max. But the law is the law. If you really cared about your son's future, you'd make this easy. You're clinging to something that doesn't belong to you anymore. Her words stung more than any slap could have. Didn't belong to me anymore. Every brick, every nail, every hour I'd worked overtime to buy the materials suddenly erased by her smug certainty. Ethan avoided my gaze, staring at the floor. Dad, I don't want it to come to that. But Rachel, she's right that we need clarity. If something happened to you tomorrow, there'd be legal chaos. We'd risk losing everything. I slammed my fist against the counter. Losing everything, Ethan. Without me, you wouldn't even have this house. Without me, you wouldn't have had a childhood here, a roof over your head when your mother died, a place to bring Rachel home to. And now you're siding with her over the man who gave it all to you. Rachel's jaw tightened. This isn't about the past, Max. This is about the future. Families evolve. People move forward. You should too. Her words hung in the air like poison. That night I sat in my truck outside the house for over an hour, the engine off, headlights dimmed. I watched the glow of the kitchen window where silhouettes of Ethan and Rachel moved back and forth. They were a family now, their own unit. And I was being shoved out, reduced to a footnote. For the first time I felt real fear. Not just of losing the house, but of losing my son completely. Rachel wasn't going to stop. She'd twist the law, twist Ethan's heart, twist the very memory of all I'd done for him until nothing of me remained in his world. And I realized if I didn't fight back, she would succeed. It came on a Wednesday morning. I was at my kitchen table, the one I'd sanded and stained myself 20 years ago, sipping lukewarm coffee when a knock rattled the door. The mailman handed me a large white envelope. No return address, just a stiff formality that made my gut churn. I tore it open, my hands trembling, and there it was, a letter from a local law firm. Dear Mr. Max Carter, we are writing on behalf of our clients Ethan and Rachel Carter regarding the property located at 217 Willow Creek Lane. I didn't finish the paragraph before the words blurred. It was legal talk, terms like property transfer petition and ownership dispute. But beneath all the jargon, the message was clear. They were preparing to force me out. My own son. My flesh and blood. I drove straight to the house, the letter clutched in my hand like evidence in a trial. Rachel was the first to meet me at the door, arms crossed as if she'd been waiting. You got it, then she said flatly. I shoved the paper toward her. What the hell is this, Rachel? You went to a lawyer. You're turning this into a war. Before she could answer, Ethan appeared behind her, his face pale. He looked smaller somehow, as if caught between two storms. Dad, listen, he started, but I cut him off. No, you listen, Ethan. You sent me a lawyer's letter after everything, after all the nights I worked double shifts so you'd never go hungry after I built this house with my bare hands. My voice cracked. You didn't even have the courage to talk to me yourself. You had her do it. Rachel's tone was icy. We tried talking Max. You refused to sign. This is the next step. Ethan rubbed his forehead, his voice soft, almost pleading. Dad, it's not what you think. It's just Rachel and I. We need security. The bank won't even look at us unless the title is clear. This isn't about disrespecting you. I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow in my chest. Not about disrespecting me, Ethan. This is erasing me. This is wiping me out of the picture like I was never here. For a moment, silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Finally, Rachel spoke again, but softer, almost calculated. Max, you're making this harder than it needs to be. You're not being thrown into the street. We've talked about helping you find a small apartment somewhere close by. You'd have your own space, and we'd still visit. It could be good for everyone. Her words were dipped in sugar, but I could taste the venom underneath. An apartment. After decades of pouring myself into this place, after raising Ethan under this roof, after planting trees in the backyard, and carving initials into the porch beam, with Maria, now I was being offered an apartment like some charity case. I turned to Ethan, desperate. Do you hear yourself? Do you hear her? She's treating me like an inconvenience, like I'm some old couch taking up space. And you're letting her. His eyes met mine, and for a split second I saw the boy he once was, the boy who clung to me after Maria's funeral, the boy who swore he'd never forget what I'd done for him. But then his gaze faltered, and he looked away. I don't know what else to do, Dad. That broke me more than the letter. Because in his voice, I heard resignation. He wasn't being forced anymore. He was choosing. I stormed out, the paper crumpled in my fist, and sat in my truck until my breath stopped shaking. Through the windshield, I could see them, Rachel with her hand on Ethan's shoulder, whispering something that made him nod. I realized then it wasn't just about property. Rachel was rewriting my place in Ethan's life one step at a time, and unless I fought, I'd vanish completely. But what weapon does a father have when his own son no longer sees him as home that night? I couldn't sleep. The lawyer's letter sat on the counter like a snake coiled and ready to strike. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan turning away from me, Rachel whispering in his ear. At 2 a.m. I gave up on sleep, threw on my old flannel jacket, and drove. My truck rattled down empty streets, headlights bouncing off shuttered shops. I wasn't sure where I was going until I found myself in front of a familiar little house, my old friend Henry's place. Henry had been my neighbor years ago before he moved closer to town after his wife passed. He was a retired carpenter, a man with rough hands and a steady heart. We hadn't talked in months, but I knew if anyone would understand, it was him. I knocked, half expecting no answer at this ungodly hour, but after a moment the door creaked open. Henry, gray-haired and wearing a worn robe, squinted at me. Then he smiled faintly. Max, Lord Almighty, you look like hell. Come in. Inside, the house smelled of coffee and sawdust like it always had. He poured me a mug before I even asked. I slid the crumpled lawyer's letter across his table. He read in silence, his bushy eyebrows knitting closer the further down the page he went. When he finished, he let out a long sigh. So it's come to this. I knotted my throat tight. I built that house, Henry, with my own hands. Every nail, every board. And now they're telling me it's not mine. Worse than that, it's my son holding the knife. Henry set the paper down gently as though it might break. Max, people change when money and property get involved. I've seen it too many times. But Ethan, I always thought he had more of you in him than this. Hearing Ethan's name made something inside me ache. He does. Or at least he did. But Rachel, she's pulling the strings. And I can't get through to him anymore. He listens to her more than he listens to me. Henry leaned back, tapping his fingers on the table. You're fighting more than a daughter-in-law here. You're fighting a system. Lawyers, banks, contracts, they don't care about memories or calluses on your hands. They care about signatures. Paper. His words stung because they were true. What am I supposed to do, then? I asked, my voice cracking despite myself. Fight my own son in court. How do you win a battle when your heart doesn't even want to fight him? Henry looked at me for a long moment, then spoke softly. Sometimes fighting isn't about swinging the biggest hammer. Sometimes it's about showing the world the truth of who you are. You don't let them erase you, Max. Not with papers, not with whispers. You remind Ethan who raised him, who stood by him when no one else did. His words lit something in me. A flicker, maybe, but it was there. I thought of the nights I carried Ethan on my shoulders, the times I patched his jeans because we couldn't afford new ones the way he once told me I was his hero. Could all of that really be buried under Rachel's smooth words and a stack of legal papers? Henry must have seen the storm brewing in me because he added, if you do nothing, Max, you'll regret it every day. You wake up in that empty apartment she wants for you. But if you stand your ground no matter how it ends, at least you'll know you didn't just fade away. As dawn began to creep through his curtains, I left Henry's house with the letter tucked back in my jacket. My chest still felt heavy, but his words had planted a seed. I wasn't ready to be erased. Not yet. Driving home, I realized I needed more than anger. I needed a plan. Something bigger than just shouting at Ethan's doorstep. Something that would remind everyone, not just Ethan, not just Rachel, but the entire family, what this house really meant, and who I really was. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange clarity. I was going to fight. When I pulled back into the driveway, the morning light spilled across the house like gold paint. My house. The house I'd spent half my life shaping into a home. Yet standing there, I felt like a stranger, an uninvited guest on my own porch. Rachel's SUV was parked neatly at the side. The curtains in the living room shifted slightly. I knew she was watching. That woman had a way of making me feel smaller every time her eyes met mine. But today, after Henry's words, I refused to let myself shrink. I walked to the mailbox and pulled out the previous day's pile of letters. Bills, junk mail, and another envelope from the law office. My hands tightened around it. Not this time. Instead of tossing it aside, I slipped it carefully into my jacket pocket. Inside my small rented apartment later that day, I spread the letter on the table next to a notepad and pen. For years, I'd worked with wrenches, hammers, and drills. Now the tools I needed were word signatures evidence. Things I'd never been good with. But I knew someone who was. Her name was Lisa Reynolds, an attorney I'd known years ago when she handled a property line dispute for one of my neighbors. She was sharp, steady, and fair. Most of all, she didn't back down from people who thought money bought justice. I dug through an old drawer until I found her card edges yellowed with time. Dialing the number felt like lifting a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Lisa Reynolds' law office. How can I help you? The receptionist's bright tone felt almost foreign in the heaviness of my morning. This is Max Collins. I was wondering if Miss Reynolds is available. A pause, then one moment. My fingers tapped nervously on the table as the seconds stretched. Finally, a familiar voice came on the line. Max, it's been a long time. What's going on? Hearing her voice brought a rush of relief. I told her everything, the sacrifices, the house, the lone Rachel's disdain, Ethan's silence, And finally, the lawyer's letters. I kept my voice steady as best I could, but when I reached the part where Ethan told me this isn't your house anymore, my throat closed. Lisa didn't interrupt. She listened the way only people who care truly can. When I finished, there was a beat of silence before she spoke. Max, you did right by calling me. Don't sign anything else. Don't agree to anything without my eyes on it. From what you're telling me, this isn't just about property, it's about coercion and maybe even fraud. You have rights. You're not as powerless as they want you to believe. Her words cracked through the fog in my head like sunlight through storm clouds. Rights. I still had rights. We set up a meeting for later that week. Hanging up, I felt a small ember of hope, though it was buried under layers of fear. That afternoon, I drove back past the house. Ethan was on the porch fixing the railing. For a moment, I almost stopped, almost walked up to him, grabbed his shoulder, and begged him to remember who I was. But Rachel stepped out behind him, placing a hand on his back like a seal of ownership. Ethan glanced my way. His face was unreadable, caught between guilt and stubbornness. He didn't wave. Neither did I. Instead, I whispered under my breath, "You may have forgotten, son." But I haven't. That evening, I began gathering pieces of my story. Old receipts from the lumber yard. Photographs of me hammering beams with Ethan as a boy perched on the scaffolding. Documents showing the mortgage had always been in my name. Every scrap of proof that this house wasn't just a building. It was my life's work. As I packed them into a folder, I realized something Henry had meant. This wasn't only about walls and a roof. It was about not letting them erase me. I wasn't ready to fight my son, but I was ready to fight for myself. And that was the first step. The church hall smelled of coffee and polished wood, filled with the noise of family voices echoing off the walls. It was Ethan's son's birthday, my grandson, little Daniel. He was turning 6, and the whole family had been invited. Well, almost the whole family. Rachel hadn't sent me an invitation, of course. But Henry had called the night before, his voice low, as if worried Rachel would hear through the walls. "You should come, Max. That boy deserves to see his grandfather. And you deserve to see him too. Don't let her keep you away." So here I was, standing at the door with my folder clutched under my arm, heart pounding harder than it ever had, even in my years of laying bricks. The music of children's laughter floated out into the crisp air as I opened the door and stepped inside. The hall felt quieter than I expected. Heads turned. My sister-in-law whispered something behind her hand. Rachel's eyes found me first, sharp, icy, slicing through me like broken glass. She moved quickly across the room, her heels clicking against the floor. "Max," she said, her voice low but lethal. "What are you doing here?" I steadied myself. "I came to wish my grandson a happy birthday." Her lips curled into a smirk. "This isn't your place anymore. You weren't invited. Please, don't make a scene." Behind her, I saw Ethan standing by the cake table. His hand twitched as if he wanted to step forward but couldn't. Daniel spotted me then, his little eyes lighting up. "Grandpa," he shouted, breaking away from the crowd of kids. He ran toward me, arms wide, nearly knocking the folder from my hands. I dropped to my knees and caught him, hugging him tightly, breathing in the smell of frosting and little boy's sweat. For a moment, everything else fell away. But Rachel's voice cut through Daniel. "Go back to the table." "Now." The boy hesitated, confused, looking from me to his mother. My chest tightened as Rachel snapped again, louder. This time I said, "Now." Daniel's shoulders slumped. He pulled back from my embrace, his small feet dragging as he obeyed. The silence that followed was suffocating. My face burned with shame, but I forced myself to stand tall. "You can try to keep me away, Rachel," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But you don't get to erase me from my grandson's life, or from my son's house." Her laugh was sharp, meant to humiliate. "Your son's house, Max, don't be pathetic. That house belongs to Ethan now. You gave it away. Maybe you should accept that your time is over." Something inside me snapped. I pulled the folder from under my arm and laid it flat on the nearest table with a sharp slap. Papers spilled out, mortgage documents, receipts, photographs of me and Ethan building the frame of the house decades ago. The crowd leaned closer, whispers spreading. "Do you see this?" I said, raising my voice so the whole room could hear. Every board, every brick, every nail in that house has my sweat on it. I built it with my own hands, and I never signed it away no matter what she tells you. This isn't just Ethan's house. It's my home, too. Rachel's smile faltered for the first time. She glanced nervously at the papers. You think a few scraps of paper will change anything? She sneered, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. You're still nothing. Poor Bitter, clinging to the past. But now the tide in the room had shifted. Henry stepped forward, his face firm. Rachel, enough. We've all watched you push Max aside, pretending he doesn't matter. But we know the truth. Without him, Ethan wouldn't even have a roof over his head. The whispers grew louder. Some family members nodded. Rachel's cheeks flushed red. Ethan finally stepped forward, his jaw tight, eyes flickering between me and his wife. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his face, cracks in the wall Rachel had built around him. Dad, he began, his voice rough. My heart clenched at that word. I hadn't heard it from his lips in months. But Rachel grabbed his arm. Don't, she hissed. I met Ethan's eyes, refusing to look away. Son, I never asked for much. But don't let her rewrite our story. You know the truth, you lived it with me. The hall was silent again, all eyes on him. Ethan's hand twitched against his side, torn between loyalty and truth. And in that heavy silence, I realized the battle wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about whether my own son still remembered who his father was. The room seemed to hold its breath. The only sound was the faint hum of the ceiling fans stirring the scent of birthday cake and coffee. Ethan stood frozen between me and Rachel, his body angled toward her, but his eyes kept drifting back to me. Dad, he said again. Softer this time, like he was testing the word on his tongue after forgetting its weight. I swallowed hard, waiting. Rachel's nails dug into his sleeve. Ethan, don't let him guilt you. He's trying to make this about him as always. This day is for Daniel. My voice cracked, but I forced strength into it. It is about Daniel Rachel. That boy deserves to know where he came from. And Ethan deserves to stop pretending he was raised by a ghost. Gasps fluttered across the hall. A cousin muttered something under his breath, and Henry shot him a look. The tension was thick, like a storm gathering. Ethan rubbed his face with one hand, exhaling sharply. I don't want a scene. You already have one, Henry said firmly. And you need to face it. Rachel's eyes flared. Stay out of this, Henry. But Henry didn't budge. He folded his arms, looking at Ethan. Your father bled for that house. We all know it. You can't erase that. I stepped closer, my hands trembling but my voice steady. Ethan, when you were little, you used to run around those half-built walls. Remember, you carried a toy hammer pretending you were helping me. You'd say, we're building it together, Dad. That was our dream. Yours and mine. Not hers. Ethan's face shifted, a flicker of memory flashing in his eyes. He opened his mouth, but Rachel cut in, her tone sharp and commanding. Memories don't pay bills, Ethan. You need to think about our future, not his past. That house is ours now, our family stability. Do you want to throw it away for sentimentality? Her words dripped like venom. I could see Ethan's shoulders tighten, his head sinking lower as if the weight of two worlds pressed down on him. Son, I said quietly, leaning forward, your future isn't built on lies. Don't let her turn you into a stranger to yourself. That house, our bond, isn't just wood and bricks. It's who you are. Rachel's laugh rang out brittle and cutting. Who he is, he's a grown man, Max, not a little boy clinging to fairy tales. He has responsibilities now, and frankly, you're just an embarrassment. A washed-up old man with nothing left but stories of when you mattered. The words sliced me open. I felt heat rise to my face, shame threatening to choke me. But then I saw Daniel at the cake table peeking nervously over his plate. His small eyes darted between us, wide and worried. And suddenly I wasn't ashamed, I was furious. I raised my voice louder than I'd planned. You don't get to decide when a father stops mattering. You don't get to erase me from my son's life or my grandson's. The room erupted into whispers again. Some faces turned toward Rachel with doubt. Others avoided my gaze, uncomfortable with the spectacle. But Daniel slipped off his chair, creeping closer, as if instinctively drawn to the truth being spoken. Ethan finally shook Rachel's hand off his arm. His voice cracked as he spoke, raw and uncertain. "Rachel, enough. He's my father. You can hate him if you want, but you can't tell me to pretend he's not standing here." The crowd fell silent. Rachel's face turned pale, her lips twitching as if the words physically struck her. "Ethan," she hissed, "don't you dare take his side. After everything I've done for you, after everything we've built." Ethan's eyes welled with tears, his jaw tightening. He looked at her, then at me. "I'm not choosing sides," he whispered, though his voice carried. "I'm just done lying." The air crackled. Rachel took a step back, her breath sharp. For the first time, she looked uncertain, like the ground beneath her heels wasn't as solid as she thought. I exhaled slowly, my chest rising with a mix of fear and hope. Maybe, just maybe, my son was starting to remember. Rachel's silence lasted only a moment before it shattered. She stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor, her voice rising above the hushed crowd. "You think this man is some kind of hero?" she spat, pointing at me. "He's nothing but a liability. A washed-up mechanic who couldn't even hold his own marriage together. And now, when he should be retired or gone, he's here trying to make us all pity him." The room stiffened. The air felt electric, charged with discomfort. A couple of relatives shuffled awkwardly while others stared openly, waiting for the clash to explode. Ethan lowered his gaze, shame flickering across his face. He was retreating again, shrinking into himself. Rachel knew it, and she pressed harder. "Do you know what it's like living under the shadow of his mistakes?" She continued, her words sharp as daggers. "Every time you tried to get ahead, Max, you failed. You drained resources. And when Ethan and I were finally building something stable, you came back with your sob story demanding recognition you don't deserve." Her tone grew venomous, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "You didn't give us anything. You're not the reason we have this house, this family, this life. If anything, you've been holding Ethan back his whole life." I felt the sting, my chest tightening. For a second, I almost faltered, almost believed her venom. But then the weight of 25 years came rushing back, every overtime shift I worked, every bill I covered, every time I patched holes in the roof with my own hands so Ethan wouldn't feel the rain. I straightened my back and looked around the room. My voice came low at first, but clear. "Not the reason," I repeated, shaking my head slowly. "You want to raise me, Rachel? Then let's tell the truth tonight." All eyes snapped to me. "I built that house with these hands," I said, lifting them, scarred and calloused. "Every wall, every floorboard, every beam. I poured my youth into it, not for myself, but for Ethan. For the day he'd have a place to raise his family. And when the banks came after you two, when you were drowning in debt and about to lose it all, who signed over the deed, who gave you the only stability you ever had?" Ethan's head shot up, his lips parting. Rachel's face went pale, but I didn't stop. "I took out a second mortgage when Daniel was born because the hospital bills were too high. I sold my retirement savings so Ethan could finish college. Every scrap of stability you boast about, Rachel, came from me breaking myself apart to give it." The whispers spread again, sharper this time. An aunt covered her mouth. A cousin muttered, "My God." Rachel tried to recover her laugh, brittle and forced. "So what you think that makes you a saint? People make sacrifices. That doesn't mean you get to hold them over our heads forever." I stepped closer, my voice rising. "I never held it over anyone. I did it because I loved my son. Because I believed family was worth every sacrifice." My voice cracked raw. "But what did I get in return? A locked door. A birthday where my grandson wasn't even allowed to look at me. And tonight, I stand here treated like an intruder at a party in the house I bled to keep." The room erupted. Some relatives murmured angrily at Rachel. Others looked at Ethan, waiting for his response. Daniel clung to his mother's side, confused but attentive, his small hand tightening around her dress. Ethan's face was wet, now tears streaking silently down his cheeks. His lips trembled as though words were fighting to break free. Rachel, desperate, lunged for control. "Enough," she snapped, grabbing Ethan's arm again. "Don't listen to him, Ethan. He's manipulating you, guilt-tripping you." He doesn't want you to be happy. He wants to drag you back into his misery. You're not a little boy anymore. You're a husband, a father. You have to protect your family from him." Her voice shook, but she covered it with fury. I raised a trembling finger, pointing at Daniel. "And what about him? What story are you writing for him? One where his father denies his own grandfather, one where love is traded for comfort because one day Daniel will ask. And what will you tell him then?" The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan's breathing grew heavy, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. He looked at Rachel, then at me, then at his son, who was staring up with wide, questioning eyes. Finally, Ethan whispered, barely audible at first, but clear enough to pierce through the noise. "I don't know who I am anymore." The words dropped like a stone into water, sending ripples through the crowd. And in that moment, I knew Ethan's heart was cracking open. He was on the edge. But whether he'd fall toward me or back into Rachel's grip, that remained to be seen. For a heartbeat, Ethan's confession, "I don't know who I am anymore," hung in the air like a fragile glass ornament. Then the room broke open. Aunt Linda, my late wife's sister, was the first to speak. Her voice was sharp, slicing through the silence. "Rachel, enough, you've crossed a line. Max gave everything for this family. How dare you treat him like he's a burden?" Across the room, Uncle Paul snorted, folding his arms. "Oh, come on, Linda. Don't make him a martyr. Rachel's right in one way, Max lives in the past. Sacrifices or not, Ethan has to live in the present. This isn't about some old debts, it's about moving forward." The words cracked the room like lightning splitting a tree. Cousins began whispering, some shaking their heads at Rachel, others frowning at me. It was no longer a quiet birthday party, it was a courtroom, and I was both the accused and the evidence. Rachel seized the opening. She moved closer to Ethan, lowering her voice just enough to sound intimate but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Baby, look at me," she pleaded, clutching his arm. "This man will destroy what we've built. Every time he's in our lives, he drags us backward. Don't let guilt blind you. Think of Daniel. Think of the stability we've worked so hard for." Her eyes shone with a kind of desperation I hadn't seen before. Not just anger, fear. She was losing control, and she knew it. I stepped forward, my chest heavy. Stability built on erasing your own blood isn't stability, it's a lie. "Ethan, don't you see every brick in this house is tied to your childhood, to the sacrifices your mother and I made so you'd never go hungry, never feel homeless? Are you really willing to cut me out of that story so Rachel can feel comfortable?" A murmur of agreement rippled across the room. Daniel clung tighter to his mother's dress, his small eyes darting between us like he was watching a storm roll in. Then Cousin Jared spoke up, his voice loud and brash. "Why don't we call it what it is? Rachel doesn't want Max around because she's embarrassed. Afraid her friends might see an old mechanic who doesn't fit her picture-perfect world." Gasps rose and Rachel's face twisted with fury. She snapped back, her voice trembling. "That's not true. This is about boundaries, about protecting my family, your family," Aunt Linda echoed, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Last I checked, Ethan was Max's son before he was your husband. You don't get to erase history just because it makes you uncomfortable." The room swirled into chaos, voices, overlapping arguments sparking like wildfire. Some defended me, others defended Rachel, and Ethan stood frozen in the center of it all, his face pale, his shoulders trembling. Rachel, sensing the tide turning, pulled out her last weapon, emotional blackmail. She turned to Ethan, her voice breaking her tears, falling in rehearsed drops. "If you choose him tonight," she said, pointing at me with shaking hands, "then you're choosing a life of guilt and regret. Do you want to ruin everything we've built? Do you want Daniel to grow up in a divided home because you couldn't let go of your father's ghosts?" Her sobs filled the room. She buried her face into Ethan's chest, clutching him like he was the last lifeboat on a sinking ship. Ethan's hands hovered awkwardly in the air before he let them fall around her. But his eyes locked on me over her shoulder. They were glassy, torn, searching. I took a step closer, my voice low, steady, but heavy with sorrow. "Son," I said, my throat tight, "don't choose between us. Choose the truth. Look inside yourself and ask what kind of man you want Daniel to see when he grows up." One who stands for loyalty even when it's hard, or one who lets fear dictate his family. The room fell silent again, every eye darting between us. Ethan's chest rose and fell rapidly, his face twisted in anguish. He was being pulled in two directions, each strong enough to tear him apart. And then, unexpectedly, it was Daniel who broke the tension. His small voice, innocent yet piercing, rang out. "Daddy, why is Grandpa crying?" The question was so simple, so pure, it cut through the noise like a knife. The crowd stilled. Rachel froze. Ethan's body jerked as though struck. I felt the tears slide down my cheeks before I even realized they'd come. I tried to wipe them quickly, but Daniel had already seen. His little hand reached out almost instinctively before Rachel yanked it back. That moment shattered Ethan. He pulled away from Rachel, staring at her in shock. Don't do that to him," he whispered, his voice cracking. Rachel's face drained of color. But Ethan shook his head violently, tears spilling now. "I can't do this anymore." The room gasped. The split had reached its peak. Ethan stood trembling, caught between two worlds, his wife clinging to one arm, his father standing broken before him, and his son watching it all unfold. Chapter 18 should be the emotional storm. Ethan finally speaks his truth. Rachel lashes out in desperation, and Max delivers the one revelation that changes everything, forcing Ethan to make his irreversible choice. The air in the room felt heavy, as though the walls themselves were suffocating us. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was Daniel's small, trembling breaths as he clutched his stuffed toy, wide eyes darting between the adults. Ethan's voice cracked first. I can't keep living like this. I'm drowning. Every day, I feel like I'm being torn in half between the man who raised me and the woman I promised to stand beside." His chest rose and fell like he'd just run a marathon. "And I don't know if I can survive it." Rachel's sobs erupted, instantly sharp and desperate. She grabbed his arm with both hands. "Ethan, don't say that. Don't let him twist this. This isn't about choosing between me and him. It's about protecting our family." "Our family," she gestured toward Daniel, her voice rising almost to a scream. "Do you want him growing up in chaos? Do you want him to see us fighting like this? Because that's what your father brings into this house: chaos, guilt, and pain." The words sliced through me like knives, but I stayed silent. Years of raising Ethan had taught me something Rachel never understood. Sometimes silence speaks louder than fury. Ethan closed his eyes, wincing like each word burned into him. "Rachel, you don't understand. My father is my family. He always has been. When Mom died, he didn't walk away. He didn't break. He built this house for us with his own two hands." His voice trembled as he looked down at me. "He never stopped being there for me, no matter how hard things got." Rachel's tears turned to fire. She spun toward the crowd, desperate for backup. "You see what he's doing? He's poisoning Ethan against me. This is manipulation, guilt-tripping, classic behavior of someone who refuses to let go." Uncle Paul nodded grimly, murmuring agreement. But most of the others remained silent, their eyes flicking nervously between me and Rachel, waiting for the next blow. And then I spoke, my voice low but steady, breaking through the tension like thunder on the horizon. "You want to talk about manipulation, Rachel? You want to talk about guilt?" She froze, glaring at me. "Don't you dare," but I cut her off, stepping closer, my eyes locked on hers. "I didn't want to say this. I swore I wouldn't. But you leave me no choice. Because the truth is, Ethan doesn't even know how close he came to losing everything. Not just his marriage, not just his house, but his son." Ethan's head jerked up, confusion written across his face. "Dad, what are you talking about?" I swallowed hard, my throat tight, but the words poured out anyway. "When Daniel was born, the hospital bills piled up. Insurance barely covered half. You were buried in debt. Ethan, you remember. What you don't know is that Rachel came to me quietly behind your back. She begged me for help, and I gave it. I signed away my last savings, sold off the little land I had left just to make sure you wouldn't lose Daniel before you ever got to hold him." The room went dead silent. You could hear the faint buzz of the overhead lights. Rachel's face drained of color. Ethan's jaw dropped. That's That's not true. Rachel, his voice cracked as he turned to her. Rachel stammered, her eyes darting wildly. It wasn't like that. I only did it because we were desperate, because you couldn't. What Ethan roared, his voice shaking the walls. Couldn't provide, couldn't be the man you wanted me to be, and you never told me. You let me think Dad was just old and broke when he's the reason Daniel is even alive. Rachel backed up, her face twisted with panic. I was protecting you. I didn't want you to feel weak protecting me. Ethan's fists clenched. His voice broke into a raw scream. No, Rachel. You were protecting yourself. Protecting your pride, your perfect little picture of a family without flaws. And in doing that, you turned me against the one man who never abandoned me. The words reverberated in the room like a gavel striking down. Rachel tried again, her voice desperate now, almost shrill. Ethan, don't let him do this. He's twisting the story. He's making me the villain because he's jealous. Can't you see that? But Ethan was no longer listening. His tears streamed freely now, his body trembling with anger and heartbreak. He looked at me, his father, his eyes red and swollen. Dad, he whispered, his voice breaking. Is it true you gave up everything again for us? I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Ethan's knees buckled and he sank into a chair, his head in his hands. My God, all this time I treated you like a burden. I let her words get into my head. And you never once told me. You just let me hate you while you kept saving me. I reached out, laying a hand on his shoulder. Because love doesn't keep score, son. It just gives. Even when it hurts. Rachel's sobs turned hysterical. Ethan, please don't let him ruin us. Don't let him win. Ethan stood suddenly, his face hard, his voice loud enough to shake the rafters. This isn't about winning or losing. This is about truth. And the truth is, Rachel, you've been lying to me for years. Manipulating me. Using my father's sacrifices as your weapon. I won't let you do it anymore. The room erupted, gasps, whispers, people covering their mouths. Rachel staggered back like she'd been struck, her world collapsing. Ethan turned toward me, his voice trembling but resolute. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I pulled him into my arms, tears streaming down both our faces. For the first time in years, I felt my son's embrace again. It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase the past. But it was real. Rachel stood frozen, her tears streaking mascara down her face, her screams echoing into silence as she realized the tide had turned. The living room was still humming with whispers when Ethan finally pulled away from me. His arms lingered around my shoulders as though he wasn't ready to let go of the truth he had just rediscovered. My chest ached, but in a way that felt cleaner, freer, like the weight of years had shifted. Rachel, though, was unraveling. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her breath came in sharp bursts, and her eyes darted wildly around the room, as if searching for an escape hatch. Then, with a sudden raw cry, she rushed toward Ethan, gripping his arm with both hands. Ethan, no, no, please, she begged, her voice cracking. Don't do this to us. Don't let him come between us. We've built everything together, you, me, Daniel. We're a family. He's just bitter, dragging you down into his misery. Don't throw all this away because of one night, one revelation. Ethan tried to pull free, but she clung tighter, her fingers digging into his skin. His face contorted with conflict, torn between the woman he had built a life with and the father who had quietly carried him through every storm. I don't want to lose you, Rachel sobbed, her forehead pressing against his chest. I know I made mistakes. I know I lied, but I did it because I was scared. Scared of losing you. Scared that if you saw him as some kind of hero, you'd stop needing me. I can't live like that, Ethan. I can't lose you. Her words spilled out like broken glass, sharp, painful, desperate. The room was silent, except for her cries. Even Uncle Paul, who had been her most vocal defender, shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the floor. A few of the cousins looked away, embarrassed by the spectacle, while Daniel clung to the corner of the couch, his little eyes brimming with confusion. Ethan's hands hovered in the air, trembling. He looked at her, then at me, then back at her again. Rachel, he said, his voice hoarse, you didn't just lie to me. You made me believe my father was a burden when he was the one saving us. You made me feel ashamed of him, and that his voice cracked that I can't forgive easily. Rachel shook her head violently, tears flying. I can change. I can fix this. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. I'll tell everyone the truth. I'll apologize. I'll beg him for forgiveness if that's what it takes. Her eyes flicked toward me, pleading desperate, almost feral. Please, Max. Please don't take him from me. You've already had him for most of his life. Can't you let me keep what's left? Her words hit like a whip, but I stayed still, my expression calm. Rachel, I said softly, I was never trying to take Ethan from you. I only wanted to be part of his life, to love him and my grandson without shame. But love built on lies can't stand. You've been afraid of me because you thought my love for him somehow diminished yours. But it doesn't work that way. Her face twisted, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Ethan finally pried her hands off his arms. He stepped back, his voice breaking but firm. I don't know what's going to happen to us, Rachel. I don't know if we can fix this. But right now I need space. I need to think. And I need my father. Rachel's knees buckled and she collapsed into the chair, sobbing uncontrollably. The room shifted. Some relatives murmured words of sympathy for her, while others quietly, cautiously came to me, placing hands on my shoulder, whispering, You did the right thing, Max, or he deserves to know the truth. For the first time in years, I felt something stir in me that I thought had been lost dignity. Daniel slipped off the couch and toddled over to me, his small hand wrapping around my rough fingers. He didn't say much, just whispered Grandpa like it was the most natural word in the world. And in that moment I knew not everything was broken. The night wasn't over. The wounds weren't healed. But the storm had cracked something open, and through the wreckage a glimmer of light began to shine. The night air inside that living room felt thicker than smoke, heavy and suffocating, as though every breath carried the weight of what had just been revealed. No one moved at first. Rachel's sobs filled the space like an unwanted soundtrack, raw and jagged, her shoulders heaving against the chair. Ethan stood stiffly nearby his chest, rising and falling in uneven bursts. His hands, then the murmurs. Aunt Margaret, the eldest of my sisters, shook her head slowly, her voice sharp enough to slice the air. I always knew something wasn't right. Rachel lifted her head, her mascara-smeared face twisting. You don't understand, Margaret. None of you do. I was protecting my family. Ethan needed me to be strong, protecting. Uncle Paul interrupted with a bitter laugh, stepping forward. He had defended Rachel countless times before, but tonight even his voice faltered. Protecting who? Rachel, because it sure as hell wasn't Ethan. And it wasn't Max. It was yourself. You've been building walls around that. A silence fell again, heaved. Some relatives avoided my eyes, embarrassed by the years they'd gone along with Rachel's quiet narrative, nodding politely whenever she made a sly comment about my shortcomings. Others shifted closer to me as though proximity itself was a confession of guilt and a plea for forgiveness. Ethan finally broke. He turned to face the crowd, his voice trembling but clear. All of you, all these years, you let me believe my dad wasn't enough. You let me think he was a burden, a shadow on my life, and now I see it wasn't him. It was lies. It was manipulation, and you all stood by and let it happen. The words hit like stones. Several cousins lowered their heads. You didn't want any. Looked at him, Rachel. Pushed hers. No. Raised as though the crowd stirred again. I stood there quietly, and for the first the house had fallen quiet by midnight, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that follows a storm, heavy with the weight of broken branches and flooded earth. The relatives had long since left, some whispering their judgments as they slipped into the night, others leaving with shame written plainly on their faces. Only the core of us remained marooned in the wreckage of what used to be a family gathering. I found Ethan alone in the den, slumped on the couch with his head in his hands. The lamp cast a soft, amber glow outlining the tremor in his shoulders. He hadn't noticed me at first. His phone lay face up on the coffee table screen, dark as though even it had given up on him. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were bloodshot, his cheeks streaked with tears. he hadn't bothered to wipe away. Dad, he whispered the word cracking like it hadn't since he was a boy. I don't even know who I am anymore. I sat down beside him, slowly, careful not to crowd him. You're my son, I said simply. That's who you are. But Ethan shook his head violently. No, I've been a coward. I let her, his voice broke. I let Rachel convince me you weren't enough. That you were the reason I always felt less. I should have questioned it. I should have seen it. But I didn't. I believed her. I let her turn me against you. His words cut deeper than any insult Rachel had ever thrown my way because they came from the boy I had raised, the man I had loved unconditionally. I reached out, resting my hand on his back. His body shook beneath my palm. You were trying to be a good husband, I murmured. You trusted her because that's what a husband does. That's not weakness, Ethan. That's love. But now you see the truth, and you still have time to make it right. Ethan covered his face again, letting out a guttural sob that seemed to tear through him. For a long time, I just sat with him, letting the sound fill the space. Sometimes, words only cheapen the pain. But Rachel wasn't far. I heard the creak of the floorboards behind us, and when I turned there, she was in the doorway. Her eyes were swollen, her hair tangled, her face pale with exhaustion. Yet still, she clung to a shred of defiance. Ethan, she whispered, her voice soft, pleading. Please, don't let him do this. Don't let him drive a wedge between us. Everything I did for us. For our future. For Daniel. Ethan snapped his head toward her, his voice rising in fury I had rarely seen in him. For Daniel, don't you dare use his name. You lied to me, Rachel. You lied to everyone. And you poisoned our son's image of his grandfather before he even had the chance to know him. Rachel flinched as though the words were a slap. Her lips trembled. I was scared, she said finally, her voice almost breaking. Scared of being less. Scared that people would judge us if we leaned on him. Scared that his life of scraping by would define ours too. Then you chose the wrong fear, Ethan said flatly. Because the only thing people will judge us for now is how we treated the man who gave us everything. The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel's mouth opened as though to argue, but no words came. She looked at me then, her eyes brimming with something between hatred and despair. For a fleeting second I thought she might collapse to her knees and beg. Instead, she turned sharply and fled down the hall, her sobs echoing behind her. Ethan leaned back, exhausted, his head thudding against the couch. What do I even do now? He whispered. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked around the room, the faded photos on the walls, the worn rug beneath our feet, the house that had become both a sanctuary and a prison. You start, I said finally, by deciding what kind of man you want your son to see. The kind who runs from the truth, or the kind who rebuilds from it. Ethan closed his eyes, the words settling over him like a burden and a lifeline all at once. And I knew as the clock ticked past midnight that the real storm hadn't ended. It had only shifted inward into hearts, into choices, into the fragile bonds still holding us together. Morning came with the pale light of winter seeping through the curtains. The air in the house was heavy, like it had absorbed every whispered argument, every slammed door, every unshed tear from the night before. I had slept little instead, lying awake on the old recliner, listening to the creaks and sighs of a home that no longer felt like mine, yet still carried my fingerprints in every corner. When I finally stirred, I heard voices in the kitchen. Ethan's was firm though weary. Rachel's was sharp, trembling with desperation. We can fix this, she was saying. We can tell them it was all a misunderstanding. People forget. They'll move on. Ethan's reply was steady, almost too calm. It's not about them, Rachel. It's about us. About my father. About what kind of people we've become. And I won't raise Daniel in a house built on lies. I stepped closer, unseen, in the hallway. Rachel's face was pale, her hands shaking as she clutched a mug of coffee she hadn't touched. She looked like a woman cornered, her defenses collapsing. And what she hissed. You'll just throw me out after everything I gave up for this family? Ethan's jaw tightened. You didn't give up anything. You took. You manipulated. You made me choose between the man who raised me and the woman I married. And last night, for the first time, I saw how wrong that choice was. Her mug clattered into the sink, shattering porcelain into sharp white shards. So that's it, you're choosing him over me. I'm choosing what's right, Ethan said quietly. If you can't live with that, then maybe you should go. The words hung in the air, and for a long moment I thought Rachel might fight. I thought she might scream or throw something or beg like her pride had always prevented her from doing. Instead, she went still. Her eyes hardened, her shoulders squared, and I saw the last of her hope drain away. She turned and saw me standing in the doorway. For the first time in years, there was no venom in her stare, only exhaustion, only the bitter recognition of defeat. You win, she whispered, but don't expect forgiveness. From me or from the world. She swept past me, her perfume trailing faintly, her footsteps sharp against the tile. Minutes later, the sound of a suitcase zipping, the front door slamming, and the crunch of tires on gravel marked her exit. The silence she left behind was different than before. Not oppressive, liberating. Ethan sank into a chair, his head in his hands. He looked broken, but also lighter, as though a chain had finally been cut. I walked to him and laid a hand on his shoulder. Son, I said softly, this house, it was never about walls or a roof. It was about family. You lost sight of that, but you can find it again. His eyes met mine, red-rimmed but clear. I don't deserve it, he said. None of us do, I replied. That's why it's a gift. One you'll have to work for every day. But you're not alone. Just then, little footsteps padded into the room. Daniel, still in his pajamas, rubbed his eyes and looked up at us. Grandpa, he said sleepily, are you staying for breakfast? I felt something inside me crack, then mend all at once. I pulled him gently into my arms, breathing in the simple warmth of a child who hadn't yet learned how cruel the world could be. Yes, Daniel, I whispered into his hair. I'm staying. And in that small moment, I realized it wasn't Rachel's approval or the house itself or even vindication that mattered. It was the chance to sit at a table again with my son and grandson to begin the slow, painful, necessary work of rebuilding. The house no longer belonged to me, but the family, the bond between blood and love that was mine to fight for. And as long as I had breath, I would.